I'll try to go full 2 hours. If for whatever reason you want to cut it short, just let me know. But you said you could do it, so I could do it too. So without further ado, Sofia Smallstorm, welcome to Nature of Reality Radio. Pleasure having you on what is probably going to be, and this is a disclaimer for my listeners here, the first show on Patreon that's connected to YouTube, of course, but YouTube will have it as non-accessible, unlisted, whatever the word technically is that I should be using there, with the Patreon link. So you're gonna have to pay me to listen to these videos for maybe a couple of weeks. If you're of the patient variety and are willing to wait, it'll probably be about 2 to 3 weeks after I do an interview from now on before I upload it to YouTube for everybody to see. And also, please, listeners, listen to my interviews also on Cost.TV after they go public rather than YouTube, because Cost.TV allows me to monetize using blockchain. So the link will be provided in the YouTube videos 2 or 3 weeks after I do the original interview when I upload them after they get put on Cost.TV as well. Sofia Smallstorm, thank you for coming on. Some people may expect us to talk about certain things that you're known for in the past, but you said that you've kind of moved on for those things, so I will respect that. But for those that haven't heard about you, please tell us your life story. You got the floor. I will put myself on mute, and I don't have Alex Jones-itis. I will not interrupt you, so knock yourself out. Life story, please.
No, I can't tell my life story. It would take my life to
Oh,
tell it. So
oh,
I'm
well,
just going to say that, we can be curious and we can answer our questions. And sometimes we have to wait for the answers. And sometimes we have to find the answers. And sometimes the first answers we find are not the right answers and they don't even feel like the right answers. So I have become a person who kind of just answers my own questions. And that's what I make my priority because if something doesn't make sense, then I want to know why it doesn't make sense. So I began in the 9/11 era. I made a documentary called 9/11 Mysteries, which was very popular. People thought it had high production quality. That was very nice of them. And I did put every effort I could in to make it look good and be thorough. And then I moved into this chemtrails territory because I could see in the sky something was very wrong. And I started the website aboutthisky.com, not about this guy. This is what people think. Oh, about what guy? No, 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 no guy, the sky. And I then moved on because things just got more and more strange. And I had more and more questions. And it was in 2009 that I woke up to this, the futurists and how they wanted to marry man with machine. And I had been looking at the very unnatural materials that seemed to be descending from the sky in the chemtrail spray. And that made me add one and one and get two. And I believe I was perhaps the first person ever to posit the idea that chemtrails were giving us synthetic biology ingredients that were landing on the ground and making their way into biological organisms, and that this was all for the purpose of transhumanism in humans and then transbiology, synthetic biology in other life forms. I could not explain this at any length, and there wasn't a lot of nanotech around at that time for the average person to get wind of. But I do live in the biotech capital of America, San Diego, and we have certain companies here like J. Craig Venter Institute. There are a lot of, you'll drive down certain roads and you'll see these corporate signs, carved in stone, and they'll have these weird names like neurocrin that just make you cringe. Should be neurocringe. And you wonder what's going on in there. And I began to understand that synthetic biology was the future, and there was a lot in that term. So now we're seeing this appear in the new type of vaccines that they're planning to give us for this COVID pandemic that we've been told we're all suffering from or roiling within. So I have left that older terrain of 9/11 and chemtrails because there's a lot more now to explore. And I began a newsletter some 10 years ago, which I sent you some copies of. I write it every month. It's by subscription. And now it's become kind of popular. I I get to do radio shows based on the content of certain newsletters. And that gives people who aren't subscribers a chance to get wind of what I'm looking into. But the best way, a lot of people will write and say, oh, how do I keep up with you? I have this blog, sofiasmallstorm.com, which is just one dedicated page of about the sky. And then there are archives of my previous years of putting posts up. And they're not my original posts necessarily, but they are very carefully selected from material that's out there. And I really believe that these are good selections, the best selections I can find that have crossed my path. So the blog is a place to get educated if you like. Every now and then I don't throw a ton of stuff on there, but just a little bit every day or so. SofiaSmallstorm.com, Sophia with an F, Sofia. And so that's basically it, Andrew. Now, how did you find out about me?
Well, I first heard about you from the most joke of a horrible History Channel documentary ever made, which of course is that one which attempted to debunk 9/11 truth, that it was the worst joke ever, and you were featured in that a few times. In fact, I gotta congratulate you for trying to make things so clear and obvious, and in the process of doing it, helping expose the trolls and also show just how stupid people are in not wanting to accept the truth. When in that program they had you explain that the collapse of a building is clunkety clunk multiple times, and it takes a couple minutes or something to say that as many times as there are floors in the twin towers. And you watch that documentary on YouTube. The trolls had a field day with picking on you for that, saying, "Where does she get her info? Wile E. Coyote cartoons or something?" And that was like, oh my God, that she could have explained it any simpler to explain that the official story's a lie. That how fast the buildings fell, and how many times it says to say clunkety clunk, that many floors. It's so obvious that could you have shown that the official story is a lie any more simpler than that for the average human? And yet the trolls made total asses of themselves trying to expose you. So congratulations on probably waking up a lot of people, and also revealing to some people just how gullible they are and not wanting to believe something. But since you moved on from that, let's. I'm sorry, it's just so 9/11 is not a laughable thing, but you made a lot of people look stupid with that. Congratulations. Anyhow, also David Icke featured your documentary prominently in his talk in London at Wembley in October 2012, which I got to see there live. I don't know if anybody told you that. I'm sure they did, that you were featured prominently in that talk. I think it was called Remember Who You Are. Great talk there. But yes, and of course I did look at some of your chemtrail work regarding, I think it was a documentary out there somewhere. I don't know if it was on prisonplanet.tv or if that was some other chemtrail documentary. But yeah, I've heard about you from those places, and this stuff that you're talking about was somewhat new to me until I looked at those Avatar update newsletters you sent me. So, want to go into some of that material now?
Okay, good. Well, yeah, I have progressed beyond clunkety clunk, and I had thought of that slightly before the crew came. And I have to say that the NBC crew that filmed me and my editor was really very sincere. I think they were given instructions to light us in an unflattering way. I never really watched the History Channel thing myself because I don't like looking at myself, but I felt like the clunkety clunk analogy was the simplest one I could come up with. And yes, it, as you say, try saying that 110 times. That's the best that you're going to be able to do, is not 10 seconds, right? So anyway, the documentaries you're talking about, chemtrails, I did two presentations from Chemtrails to Pseudo-Life, Part 1 and Part 2, and they are still on YouTube. And in those presentations, I examined the relevance of nanotechnology in the condition known as Morgellon Syndrome, which is going to connect. It's going to connect in a huge way soon to these vaccines. And that is not a joke, okay? I have a friend who's working on that with another researcher, and there is an element in this tubular synthesis that is really how they've gotten this Morgellons form to appear in certain people. So everything connects. This is the thing. It's almost beautiful, but it's also, in a sense, alarming that we always come full circle with science, with information. And what people have to be aware of, as I'm sure they are, the ones who are listening, is there's a lot of false science being pumped out now that's a form of propaganda that doesn't hold up under scrutiny. But it seems like the way of the world is to try to, I will call it, I use this term in my newsletter, try to reduce us in all imaginable ways. And so the population reduction that we've been discussing, you know, in our alternative world for many years, we think of it as a depopulation agenda, but it's not just that, or it may not be that at all. It may actually be a way to dumb us down, to get us standardized. And this is my new thing. The the efforts to standardize humanity, to remove the individuality and the resilience. So yeah, what did you learn in those few newsletters I sent you? I think I sent you 3 or 4 of them.
Well, there was one big long history lesson dealing with getting the Native Americans involved. Very unique thing there. I think you're basically trying to tell us those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Civil War stuff in there as well, and that was very pertinent, I believe, in the present day, because I just watched a video on Stansberry Research about the guy who wrote the Rich Dad Poor Dad book. He said, I think it was him, who said this civil war is coming in America, and those in the some of my associates in the astrology field are predicting that the Civil War will turn into an American Revolution of a second nature in up until like 2023, 2024 time. But I think we need to focus on the present day now, but at the same time learn from the past. So that one where you talked about the Native Americans and mentioned the Civil War, what do you have to? What was that all about regarding the things in there specifically that you want people to know? Because we can't recite everything in these newsletters and these radios this radio show. So, what are the key things you want people to learn from that?
Well, I really presented an alternate view of Native Americans that most people have no clue about. It is very surprising. I read 12 books over the summer and fall, and I was in deep shock as I read these books. So to synthesize what I'm saying is that we are the equivalent of Stone Age Native Americans at this time. The Comanche, the Apache, the Indians of the Plains, even the semi-agrarian Indians that lived more in the eastern part of the country, none of these people were ready to deal with the very advanced technologies that whites brought with them. They could not fathom the 6-gun, the repeating firing weapon. They could not fathom the buffalo hunters' guns that could fire and fell a buffalo at half a mile or farther. They could not fathom the watch and the clock. They did not know what surveyors were doing with their instruments. They could not fathom the train that came barreling across the prairie once the tracks were laid. And so it was the very, you could say, unimaginable nature of the technology that they couldn't find a way to deal with. No matter that they were the best horsemen in the world, the Comanches were definitely more adept at horse riding and doing battle from the back of a horse, but they were still basically Stone Age. And we are the equivalent today. We are in the Stone Age when it comes to nanotechnology. We have no understanding of what nanotech can achieve. And one thing that's been kept out of mainstream discussion is electrobiology, the nature of the body's electrical and electromagnetic properties. We don't, even people who are studied, MDs who have departed from allopathic medicine that I've talked to and who are doing alternative research, they don't understand bioelectricity at all. There are maybe one or two that have looked into this and become proficient in it. That's not to say that I am, it's just to say that we forget that we are electrical and electromagnetic organisms, and our internal electricity is now being affected by all of the artificial electricity and electromagnetism around us. And it is that, how should I say it, power, I guess, that enables nanotech to work and nanobiotech to work on the cellular level. It's dovetailing with the body's electromagnetic properties. And those are things that the average person absolutely fails to comprehend. And you could spend a day explaining it and it would still just not make sense to them. So we have to understand that our neighbors and our friends are really innocent. They're like the Indians. They're still grinding corn with stones in terms of how they comprehend how science works. And I'm talking real science, not propaganda science.
All right, now we need to start talking about the ways that they are affecting our bodies. You mentioned nanotech bio, but let's start a little more basic with basic needs. One of the articles really big on the GMO thing, and I've gone to Monsanto protests in Philadelphia several times, but there hasn't been one since 2017. I don't know if it's because the people are trying to move on to other things, or I mean, some things just need to be exposed nonstop if they continue to exist in this world, and GMO is certainly one of those things. Um, Alex Jones has said a few times that people in Europe, they can um, only sleep 4 hours, and yet they can drink a lot, smoke a lot, only sleep 4 hours, and yet not feel fatigued during the day. A lot of it has to do with the fact that they don't have GMO in their food. Um, and I try to avoid the GMO shopping at Whole Foods, though some say it should be called Whole Frauds because, well, and that goes doubly since they merged with Amazon. Can't trust Jeff Bezos, the ultimate monopoly monster. But I am digressing. GMOs, I'm sure some things have changed over the past several years regarding how people's awakening of the issue has caused Monsanto to go about its dirty ways. So, why don't you enlighten us on this?
Well, I can ride us into the mRNA vaccine by using the glyphosate example. So Monsanto is famous for its herbicide Roundup, right? Which is a weed killer. And they've at the same time produced Roundup ready crops, like canola, for instance. And what they've done is they've introduced a new gene into the plant that tells it not to code for glycine, which is an amino acid, but to code for alanine instead, which is another amino acid. And this may make no sense to the average person until I explain a little more. Glyphosate was synthesized, meaning that a chemist made it in a lab in the 1950s for the first time in Switzerland. But then it was synthesized again completely independently by a Monsanto chemist in 1974. And its chemical name is N, capital N for nitrogen, phosphonomethylglycine. N-phosphonomethylglycine. And to the average person, that means nothing. But to the scientist, that says that this is the same as the amino acid glycine. It's a glycine molecule, but on the nitrogen atom, there is a methyl phosphonyl chain, N-phosphonomethylglycine. So now we have to look at this practically. What is glycine? Glycine is the simplest, most supple, most sleek amino acid in biology, all right? It's a phenomenal creation. And what's an amino acid? Amino acids are the building blocks of proteins. And so we say, what is a protein? Proteins are the materials that make up the body. They're the construction materials of the body. They are also the work crew that builds with these construction materials. They are also the supervisors and the trucks and all the machinery that moves the materials and follows the orders of the work crew. So proteins are the workhorses of the body. Your body is built from proteins. They signal and messenger all over the place. And without proteins, our bodies will fail, okay? So this glycine that we use that occurs in so many different tissues, it's a component of so many different kinds of protein in our body. It's the most common protein, amino acid found in our body. This glycine is not being used by the body when glyphosate enters the picture. So unless you're eating organic, you're eating glyphosate because they are using glyphosate, not Roundup, but the agent glyphosate as a drying agent, something that dries out or desiccates all of our core crops. So regardless of killing weeds and controlling weed growth, farmers all over the world are using glyphosate to make crops kind of get drier and more brittle right before they harvest. And that enables them to whack and cut down and harvest these crops more easily. And I'm talking about all the core crops, all the grains, all the legumes, all the beans, which are legumes, all the sugar cane, sugar beets, everything you can think of that it goes into the staples of human diet is desiccated right before harvest with glyphosate. And all these lawsuits we've been seeing about Roundup, that has to do with weed killing. So yeah, they might ban glyphosate from herbicides, weed killers, but no one's saying a thing about using glyphosate on the core crops right before harvest. So that's going to continue. That's the hidden twin. And that's the main reason that people are using glyphosate, which is being now, it was taken off patent in 2008 or so, and China is making tons of it. Everybody makes glyphosate. Everybody buys glyphosate. It's the most prevalent toxin on the planet. And why is it toxic? It's toxic because it fools the body into thinking it's glycine, the amino acid that the body loves to use in greatest abundance. So because it masquerades as glycine, the body is building proteins and tissues out of glyphosate, this man-made version of glycine. Now, why is that bad? Well, it's bad because, as I said, there's this bulky mess hanging off the nitrogen atom, N-phosphonomethylglycine. There is a methyl phosphonyl chain. And if you look at a diagram of glyphosate versus glycine, you can see it. Glyphosate has this stuff attached to the nitrogen atom. And so let's use an analogy now. Let's picture a sleek, beautifully made European car right off the assembly line, the first prototype, working prototype, and it's sleek and it's fast and it's compact and it's just speedy and supple and every good quality you can imagine. And you drive that thing and you go, wow, this drives like a dream. Now, picture the same car, exact same thing, with one of the doors jammed open, wide open. Now that's glycine versus glyphosate. Glyphosate would be the car with the door jammed wide open. Now try driving the car. It's not going to steer properly. That door is going to be caught in the wind. The car is going to buffet from side to side. It's not going to fit in parking spaces. It's not going to be able to gain speed. It's not going to be able to be, maneuverable. It's going to cause accidents. And that's what happens when your body uses glyphosate instead of glycine. Accidents. The proteins crash and burn. Your tissues fail. You get degenerative disease at 20 years old. Your joints start to go. You get injuries. You get muscle tears. You get arthritis. You get all kinds of issues beyond just musculoskeletal, because myosin is a protein that governs muscle contraction. And myosin, if it's not made right, your muscles can't contract, which means your gut can't contract, which means you can't poop. You don't have peristalsis in your intestines. So there's so many different things. Your neurotransmitters aren't being made properly. You're not getting enough of the calming neurochemicals. You're getting the agitation neurochemicals. And you end up being not just a mess, but you end up becoming ill and degenerating. So that's glyphosate entering our world in the greatest prevalence of all toxins we have ever known. And when you pair the presence of glyphosate with the enormous explosion of neurodegenerative disease, musculoskeletal problems, broken bones, arthritis, osteoporosis, all this stuff, you start understanding what's happening to us. Brain issues. What is it called? Anencephalitis, I think, anencephaly, where you don't come out with a full brain. Children aren't born with a complete brain. That's a glyphosate problem. So when we are looking at the new vaccines that are coming out, these messenger RNA vaccines, which are the new generation of vaccines, and the COVID vaccine will be the first one that's an mRNA vaccine. Those vaccines are not doing normal, they're not putting antibodies in us as we're told, or causing us to make antibodies the way the previous vaccines we were told they were doing. I have great skepticism about all vaccines. But this is a departure. These vaccines are software. They're called the software of life, and they are disseminating protein coding instructions in us. It's the same kind of thing the scientists did with the Roundup Ready plants. They are telling our cells not to make the usual proteins in the usual human biological way. They are telling our cells to make these proteins differently. So they effectively are GMO instructions for us. All right, they are making us genetically modified because they're giving us different protein coding instructions, non-human instructions.
That's a pretty disturbing thought. Also, I want to get back to something you mentioned in passing earlier regarding illnesses and where you think it may come from. The Morgellons disease episode of Ancient Aliens actually suggested it's an extraterrestrial disease. If you can make any sense of that. But anyhow, I'm a big fan of that show anyhow. But anyway, the idea that Morgellons disease, no, it's not extraterrestrial aliens poisoning us or anything like that. It's something that's, if anything, synthesized just like the dreaded virus that nobody can mention the name of on YouTube. I presume you're in the latter idea. And what is it doing to the body again? I've heard the disease so many times, but I keep forgetting.
What
What's it?
is Morgellons
Morgellon.
doing?
Yeah.
There are many different forms of this thing that people call Morgellon Syndrome. People are with mild forms of it, just notice shards of silica, glass-like things coming out of their skin, and fibers that if you take them to a lab and ask them to test, doesn't appear to be match anything in the natural world or anything known to us. So there are also people who develop lesions that never seem to heal. But the Morgellons world, it is a world of deep suffering, and a lot of people have theorized that the fibers are in all of us. So I'm just going to say that I feel that Morgellons was an experiment in synthetic biology. It targeted certain people, and they are being closely watched, whether they know it or not. And we are all being moved into synthetic biology reality, because this merger of man with technology, which is what the technocrats want, what the futurists want, what AI is all about, that's where everything is going. They don't want natural humans anymore. They want the post-human, the Homo evolutus, they call it, rather than Homo sapien. So we're slowly being changed.
Yeah. Again, like I said, with the GMO, that is a scary thing. How they're changing us and by genetically modifying us, and also with these unusual diseases that nobody's ever seen before, but probably only are coming from a synthetic nature, because since they've never been seen before, they must be synthetic in most cases anyway. Um, I'd like to get back to the vaccines. And by the way, I've heard people on YouTube say that there's a V word that you shouldn't be saying. James Gilliland say it, but then he used the words virus and vaccine after saying that there's a V word he's got to be careful not to use, or he may get deplatformed or demonetized. I'm not exactly sure what that V word is, but I presume it's not virus or vaccine because he mentioned those. But anyhow, back to the vaccines. There was in those newsletters I saw something about tobacco being involved with vaccines in more than one way. And I'm a tobacco smoker myself. I enjoy my pacho pipe. In fact, I've had one since we did this interview. It's good for radio show hosts, I must say. But anyhow, there's something dealing with tobacco and vaccines. It seems like something that shouldn't mix. In fact, if you put tobacco or nicotine in a vaccine, it's almost certain to kill you because it's not the way nicotine's meant to be taken or any of the other ingredients in tobacco. So, could you rehash what that was all about and what is the connection and the connections, if there's more than one connection between tobacco and vaccines?
Well, we're not talking about putting tobacco in vaccines. It's not that simple.
Yeah, I don't think I've read that. No,
Yeah.
those other things.
This had not been reported in the American press, but there is a company called British American Tobacco, the second largest tobacco manufacturer in the world, tobacco product manufacturer. And they have the contract to make what you could call the base material for the COVID vaccines. Why? Why is a tobacco company in the vaccine manufacturing business? All right. We have to go way back in history. The tobacco plant is no longer a natural plant. It's a GMO plant. Whether you smoke it or not, whether you like it or not, you have to face the fact that they have been monkeying around with tobacco for a very long time. And I'll give you some examples. They were using uranium tailings, which is the byproduct of uranium refinement, to fertilize tobacco plants. And they did this years and years ago, even prior to World War II. Tobacco is a very unique plant, I have learned. It is different from other plants. It's extremely resilient. It has bioelectric properties as well. And it is a phytoremediator, which means it eats up radioactive waste. It has a relationship with radioactivity. So wherever you have a nuclear plant and you have too much radiation, you can then plant tobacco, and tobacco will basically vacuum up the radioactive material from the soil. That's called phytoremediation. I wrote a newsletter about this, I think it was in 2018. During the Manhattan Project, we think of the Manhattan Project as the organizations and institutions that were working on research and development of the atomic bomb. But the fact is that the Manhattan Project did not end after World War II. It goes on. The Manhattan Project has gifted us with a lot of our teaching universities and hospitals and institutes. The University of California, the UC chain, the Salk Institute here in San Diego, Sloan Kettering in New York, Cancer Research, Tuskegee Institute in Alabama, Johns Hopkins. I mean, a lot of these big hospitals and colleges and universities that are attached to the hospitals, they're all offshoots of Manhattan Project. And Manhattan Project brought us radiation biology. We now submit ourselves to scans that for diagnostic purposes. And that is the pathway into the next era of medicine. The first being, let's just say, industrialized medicine being chemical medicine, where big pharma made chemical compounds that we were told were treatments and would cure us and help us. And the next era of medicine was radiation medicine, where we began to have MRIs, CAT scans, X-rays, all of these diagnostic tests. And we are now moving into genetic medicine, whereby we will be told that, you know, you have the propensity because of your epigenetics, your family history, for this disease or that disease. But don't worry, you know, come to our facility and we will turn those genes off in you, and we will give your body instructions to do things differently so that you avert this development altogether in your life, right? So that's genetic medicine. And another newer part of genetic medicine is this mRNA, preventive personalized medicine. So I'm going to talk about the PCR test that they are giving people for COVID. I don't believe COVID is synthesized in a lab. I don't believe that there's anything that they can really call COVID. There's a lot of flim-flam going around on what's being reported as COVID death, what's being reported as COVID case.
All right, because I need to interrupt you here. You heard that my maternal grandfather passed away on Christmas Eve, and he was allegedly diagnosed with COVID about 2 or 3 days earlier. And yeah, when I had the pre-show conversation with you, you were like, did they say that he died of COVID? Like you were chomping at the bit to tell me that there's something very misleading about his death report and anyone else for that matter who's died of COVID. And before I give you the chance to continue, I should point out that David Icke has caused a brouhaha, and he seems to stand by this, that when they test for COVID, they're not testing for a virus, they're testing for a genetic material exosome that resembles the virus. Although interestingly, before he started saying that, he pointed out that where the virus allegedly started in the Wuhan area of China, it was not too far from a couple of bioterror labs of sorts. So I don't know what he believes. Anyhow, carry on, please. Sorry to interrupt you. It's not like me to do that much, but I did want to point that out, and you were about to get into how maybe the virus is not what we're led to believe it is, and people aren't dying of it and all the way that we're led.
Well, we have to forgive people for coming up with early theories based on whatever they happen to have at hand and know so far. So a lot of people thought this was a bioterror weapon, but I think many people have gone beyond that. The PCR test, the polymerase chain reaction test, was developed by, or that technique was developed by a person living in San Diego who I once had the chance to meet, but I declined because I was told he was a nutcase, Kary Mullis. He won the Nobel Prize for the PCR technique. And I've posted on my blog. You can always go to my blog for choice little snippets that I find, sofiasmallstorm.com. There was a YouTube where a guy explained PCR pretty clearly, and I have put lots of posts up on what PCR is and how it works, but this was the best, and it's the most recent one I've put up. And Carrie Mullis in it talks about the PCR test and explains that it's not a diagnostic tool at all. Now, in my opinion, and this comes, you could call this somewhat an educated guess, right? The PCR test is not testing for exosomes. This exosome discussion is extremely limited. It's a very truncated, unexpanded discussion of what really might be going on in the body. The PCR test is a DNA grab. It's grabbing genetic material out of you, and then it's repeating it. This is what they call cycling, because they don't have enough to work with in the first place. So they kind of put it through a science Xerox machine and make more of it, so there's more of it that they can work with and study. But this is why I started thinking differently about the PCR test. A few weeks ago, maybe 2 months, 3 months ago, people started making a flap on the internet about the fact that you could see it was either a CDC document, I think it was a CDC document, and I put this one on my blog, I put the original link up there, that the PCR test was hunting for different chains of genetic markers and whatnot. And one of the chains of the nucleotide strings it was looking for was a series of letters, A, T, V, and G. I'm just talking from memory. And these letters formed exactly the nucleotide chain that describes chromosome 8, right? So when I say chromosome 8 to you, Andrew, what does that convey? Just be honest. What does chromosome 8 convey to you?
Well, the number 8, it's my life path number, but it's not significant there. But the chromosome part, when I hear chromosome, I'm thinking of the like 21 pairs or 42 pairs. Which one is it? In the DNA. That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah,
the pairs that exist.
You have 23
23. Okay.
chromosomes in 2 sets. They come from each parent, and
the Y is the male. The male is, yeah.
No, that's the last set. The last set is an XY set that determines your gender, right? Those are the sex chromosomes. So the chromosome 8 is, I looked it up. I didn't know what it was. I knew a chromosome is a chromosome. It's something that people have a bunch of, and there's different numbers that denote the different chromosomes. But what is chromosome 8? Well, chromosome 8, I found out, has to do with brain development. So I said, oh, all right, brain development. And then I read more about chromosomes and what genes are. Genes are the fragments on chromosomes that make you up. And you have a genome that it's it's called recombinant DNA that you get from your mother and your father. You have your own genome. So your genetic makeup is different from your parents. It's your own. And I theorize that the PCR test, especially because they want to give it to us repeatedly, is they're actually mapping, possibly, our genome with each test. They're making like a real physical map of us, a data map on the blockchain. The blockchain is this collection of information that is unerasable. And blockchain technology is going to take over from servers. It's going to become the information bank of the world. So each time you go for a PCR test, my little overactive mind said, all right, they're probably doing a DNA grab. They keep building and filling in your genomic map on the blockchain, because their new vaccines, as Moderna itself, the CEO of Moderna calls the new vaccine, the mRNA vaccine, messenger RNA vaccine, the software of life. He talks about personalized therapy, personalized medical therapies that they're going to make for each of us. So my theory is that they will create a reasonable profile of your genome on the blockchain, and it will be kept updated because you will have to submit to routine PCR tests. And they will know, for instance, from chromosome 8, the most recent grab that the PCR test did, and I'm sure it grabs for other nucleotides and other genetic markers. They will know what your most recent, let's call it reading, is for your current brain state. And I'm talking very simply because this is much more complex than we think, and their algorithmic science has it all dialed down. So when you trot off for your COVID vaccine, you will go into a clinic and they will consult the blockchain for your genomic map, and they will dole out a vaccine that is tailored exactly for you. Now, have you been to Home Depot, to the paint center ever?
Yeah, when I was shopping with my family way back in the day as a kid, but other than that, I haven't
Okay,
gone to Home
so
Depot
if
for.
you go to Home Depot and you choose some paint that you want to paint your bedroom or living room, there's a wall full of swatches. And you look and you consult your husband or whoever, and you decide on a shade of paint and a brand of paint. And you take this little paper swatch over to the guy at the console and you say, this is what I want, and I need whatever, 4 gallons. And he says, all right, it'll be 15 minutes. And then he goes to his little spigots and he pumps out some base paint, and he pumps out, you know, some black, um, and some, maybe his base is titanium white. He pumps black, he pumps umber, he pumps ochre, he pumps a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and he then puts it on a big agitator, mixes it up, and there you are. You've got 4 gallons of exactly the shade of paint that you came in for. That's customized paint creation. Well, they can customize your vaccines exactly the same way. And so every vaccination that you go and obtain is going to be tailored for you. And what are they going to do with that? Are they going to prevent COVID and give you, immunity? I don't think so. I think they're going to use this to standardize us. And I tried explaining this to a couple of friends, and they didn't get it until I used this analogy. Andrew, let's say you weigh 200 pounds. I weigh 100 pounds. And they want both of us to weigh 150 pounds. Let's say they want all human beings to weigh 150 pounds. So they have to give me genetic instructions to gain 50 pounds. And they have to give you genetic instructions to lose 50 pounds, meaning they have to change your metabolism. They have to rush up your metabolism and make you burn more weight, burn more fat, lose weight. They have to slow mine down so that I gain weight. Now, the weight thing is just one crude example of standardization, but they can do it. So there's other, other metabolic changes they're going to try to make in us. They're going to change the way we think, change aspects of our personality. I mean, consider it a playground. They have algorithms that can dabble in any of this. And they are going to make bets. This is called impact investing. This is the human capital market as to how long it takes to make you lose 50 pounds, me gain 50 pounds. And this is the human futures, bio-capitalism. These are the new financial products that they're going to create. And it's not just for fun. They want to standardize us because the end goal is to slide us into an integration with technology, the merger or marriage of man with machine. And in any factory, we know that you've got to standardize the parts. This particular gizmo that is made on this assembly line in this division of the factory, the screws are this size, and then there's another set of screws a different size that go into this part, and you have to have all those screws exactly the same size, all those parts exactly standardized, or your conveyor belt is going to mess up. You're not going to be able to produce. So they want to standardize us to reduce us biologically into this standard form, uniformity, so that they can then meld us with their machine technology and make us more robotic or fully robotic. How do you like that?
Well, we're supposed to be, the spiritual people say, excuse me, I just let up another pipe of tobacco. I don't inhale into my lungs. Take great care not to do that because that's how you get addicted to tobacco. But anyhow, since you asked me about turning into some sort of a cyborg human race, I think it would absolutely suck if we were on the timeline that the Terminator movies are on. Interesting I mentioned that. David Icke has said that 2029, 2030 is when the merger will occur between humans and machines. Even though he talks about negative stuff all the time, he seems to be on a positive attitude in regards to the future anyway, even though what he says kind of contradicts that. But that's a positive timeline he's on. Negative timeline is the Terminator movies in 2029 when the Terminator was sent back from that year to Carousel Khan in 1984. I don't think that we're on the negative timeline, so I'm inclined to believe that we will be able to merge with machines in the way that the Jedi and the benevolent resistance and rebels into the Star Wars universe can get along with droids. I like to see that be the future and not artificial intelligence global takeover like in the Terminator movies. Although it's a little of a contradiction when you want to try to be one with nature. They say as humans we got to learn to be one with nature. How can you be one with nature if you're playing on machines all the time? They say when it's a beautiful sunny day, turn off the TV and the computer and don't even bring your cell phone with you. Go out in nature without the machines. Well, how are we supposed to combine the three if we want to live in harmony? That's something to consider. Can you perhaps offer an answer to that?
We're not living in harmony, and we haven't lived in
Oh,
harmony for a very long time. And the fondness humans already have for technology is proving that they have no interest in living in harmony with nature, because nature is not a machine form. And what's happening, as I mentioned earlier in this discussion, is that the bioelectrical properties of living organisms are being harmed, irretrievably harmed by the electromagnetic frequencies that have been introduced into our environment that are unnatural. And I can explain a little more about this if you like. I don't know how much you're going to retain or your listeners are going to retain, but it might be worth listening to the show again if that's the case. But you know, the Earth's natural electromagnetic frequencies run at about um, well, they run from 0 to 40 hertz. Hertz cycles are the number of oscillations of an electromagnetic wave per second. And when I talk about an electromagnetic wave, I'm not talking about a squiggle on a piece of paper. These are three-dimensional waves. They are, if you pull a slinky out and you stretch it, that's what an electromagnetic wave looks like. It's three-dimensional and it's coming at you. It's going through the natural world, going through the environment. Electromagnetic waves are conducted by conductive materials, and the Earth is highly conductive. It has a lot of water, and it has a lot of quartz, silica, conductive materials in the soil. So we, being composed largely of water, our bones have conductive materials in them. Silica, we have piezoelectric crystals, in our tissues. We are hugely bioelectrical, hugely, and electromagnetic frequencies affect us, and we are tuned to deal with 7 to 12 oscillations per second, 7 to 12 hertz. And cell phones, and if you're on Wi-Fi right now, cell phones are 1 billion hertz per second, 1 billion cycles per second and more. And Wi-Fi is 2.4 billion cycles per second. Now, I do not use Wi-Fi. I do not use a cell phone. I have some electrical lamps and whatnot in my house, and I have cleaned my wiring of harmonics and noise and high frequency transients. I am trained in electrical remediation. If anyone's interested, they can contact me through the blog, and I do charge for consultations, but sofiasmallstorm.com, I can help you out if your house is generating too much electrical noise and that's affecting you. And people don't understand how much this affects us because we attribute a lot of our excuse me, neurological symptoms of distress. We attribute to stress. We think, oh, it's my job, or oh, the world is pretty fast paced these days, and people have a lot of decisions to make. There's a lot of pressure on us, and we have poor sleep. And one reason why Europeans may be sleeping only 4 hours is because the density of population there is very high, and they're all Wi-Fi'd through to the gills. And Wi-Fi keeps you up. Cell phones keep you up. You cannot sleep. The duration of people's rest is extremely limited now at night, and they're not sleeping fully. They're not going through biphasic sleep. They're not going through the proper brain cycles. They're not getting into parasympathetic mode, nervous system mode. They're not doing deep healing, deep repair, deep restoration. And so they're degenerating. This all leads to degenerative disease. It leads to anxiety. Anxiety in turn leads to a loss of metabolic balance, right? I'll pause.
Yeah, exactly. And I have done my part to try to protect myself from these energies by putting little EMF protection and Wi-Fi protection stickers around my property. I've also got some Himalayan salt lamps and tons of crystals and silver and gold. And well, you said what you said about tobacco being good for clearing out radiation. Couldn't help but ask you about this because, well, it's also said that tobacco can be good for other things. In fact, the conspiracy that of secondhand smoke and demonizing it, there are those who say that's really a lie. It's really not harmful. Secondhand smoke, for all intents and purposes, is as good as incense is, from a spiritual standpoint, at clearing out negativity. And well, when I got my mapacho from the Amazon, it actually came labeled as Amazonian incense. And well, you said that tobacco is mainly GMO'd. Well, I can certainly believe that with the cigarettes, but the mapacho that I get from the heart of the Amazon rainforest that's made by tribes people, I would have to think they're not succumbing to the GMOs and other harmful things that may be put in tobacco, and as well as all the cigar manufacturers in Central America and the Caribbean area. A lot of them are really, really poor, so they need to find some way to make money. So they go to cigar making and all that. Not to pick on their economic status, but being poor means less technology, so there's less Wi-Fi, and I don't know about the GMOs, but wouldn't the tobacco that I'm getting, and also like cigars and pipe tobacco, generally be healthy for the most part?
If you're talking about tobacco products made by commercial tobacco product manufacturers like British American Tobacco, you're dealing with GMO tobacco. If you're talking about something you got from the heart of the Amazon, probably not. But there's GMO in the Amazon too right now. And I would just say this, I'm not talking about tobacco as being beneficial to clear negative energy or anything like that. The tobacco mosaic virus, now we have to use this word virus very carefully because today people construe virus to be a disease-causing agent, and it's not. All right, I'm not talking about exosomes or any of that. That's all more modern mumbo jumbo that's unclear. But the original virus was a proteinaceous, meaning it contains protein, crystalline materials, meaning they are crystal molecular constructs, and they appear in all living things. The question was, do they appear before the organism gets sick or afterwards, right? So the first virus to be studied was called a virus. It wasn't called this before until Dmitry Ivanovsky, who is also thought of as the father of virology. He was a Russian botanist in the late 1800s. He was looking at something called spot disease on tobacco plants. And spot disease was this crinkly area on the leaves of tobacco plants. And it was also something that happened to tomatoes, eggplants, orchids, a lot of different plants that some of them might be in the nightshade family as tomatoes are. The tobacco plants got it. I think cucumbers get it. But it didn't kill the plants. It just was that the leaves got brown and crinkly in certain spots. Did you want to say something?
Uh, oh, I guess I wasn't on mute there,
Oh,
so you may
so
have
I
been able
just
to
heard.
hear
Yeah.
me.
So anyway,
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
he studied this and he took careful notes on what this brown stuff was, and he found that when he transferred this brown crinkly from the spots on the plant leaves to healthy plants, they developed brown crinkly spots too. So that's what made him think it was a disease. However, the reality is, and this is very well documented, that spot disease never killed any plant at all. It just seemed to confer itself from plant to plant. So the name was changed from spot disease to tobacco mosaic virus. Mosaic because it appeared in spots, right? So that's why they started calling it a virus, because they believed it must be making the plants sick. Now, if you go to Wikipedia and you look up tobacco mosaic virus, as I did, because I didn't know a thing about it to start with, and I read the whole page, and I read down at the bottom of the page, and there was something titled, I think they've changed the title now, but it was like industrial applications. And it said that when you transfer this tobacco mosaic virus to battery electrodes, it amplifies the capacity of the battery 6 times. And I read that and I went, what? And that's when a light bulb went off in my head. And I said, oh, it's got to be bioelectrical. And that resonated with what I had read about viruses. Viruses are crystalline. They're inorganic crystals, and they have protein content as well. So I said, well, what I know about piezoelectricity, which is the fundament of bioelectricity, is that when you apply frequency or pressure to a piezo crystal, it will generate a voltage. And when you apply a voltage to a piezo crystal, it will generate a frequency. This is called the piezoelectric effect. And it's one that electrical engineers are very familiar with. Piezoelectricity is used in industry. It's used in your lighter for your grill. It's used in transduction of microphones and the conversion from sound waves in amplification of sound waves back to sound waves again. So it's very, very commonly used in industry, and it's very prevalently used in the body. And a piezo crystal is simply a crystal with a certain lattice-like construction of its molecules. Not every crystal is a piezo crystal. So I realized tobacco mosaic virus is bioelectrical. And then a researcher friend of mine started looking into tobacco mosaic virus because I told her about it. And she found that British American Tobacco was making this vaccine stuff and had this huge contract. And the reason was that tobacco mosaic virus is extremely interesting and has been used for a long time in biotech. It is self-replicating, it is self-assembling, and it is a great carrier for other vaccine materials. So what I've now understood is that the tobacco mosaic virus, now let's not think of virus as anything except a crystalline substance, an inorganic crystalline substance that shows up in these plants. These are called plant viruses, okay? They're viruses that human beings make, they're viruses that plants make. But these viruses don't infect you and kill you. In fact, it is said that human beings don't seem to be affected by plant-based viruses, which is why they're using plants to make viruses now for vaccines. Typically, they used to grow their viral cultures in eggs, and it was expensive and it took a long time. They used animal materials as a, let's just say, a bed. But now they're using plants to generate viruses because plants can do it a lot faster and it's a lot cleaner and it's a lot cheaper. So the tobacco plant is being used to make tobacco mosaic virus in huge quantities, which is a carrier mechanism for these new types of vaccines.
Thank you. Interesting science there. Never knew that. But tobacco is a sacred plant. Always recommend going with papacho. That's the best species of tobacco. That's from the Amazon. But switching gears here, another plant that seems to have occasionally come up in conversation in both happy and also taboo settings. The cannabis plant, specifically, I want to talk about here the possibility of just like how tobacco can get rid of radiation, and allegedly the smoke is really as good as incense for clearing out negativity. So say those that don't believe in the secondhand smoke theories. Um, the cannabis plant is also is good for getting rid of artificial intelligence in the body, any implants that may have been implanted or anything like that. Do you know anything about that bold claim? And maybe that's one of the reasons they don't want it legalized, because they want to take us over with artificial intelligence, and they don't want something that's going to kill it.
I cannot speak to that at all, Andrew, and I cannot speak to whether tobacco cleans out radiation in your environment. Um, I am simply talking about phytoremediation of soil, meaning it's a plant that seems to have an affinity for radioactive materials in soil. Affinity is the operative word, which means it attracts. It doesn't clear, it doesn't negate. It takes the material out of the soil and into itself, okay? So that's all I can tell you. And there was an individual in the 1950s by the name of Henrietta Lacks, L-A-X. She was a black woman, a sharecropper. She lived on a tobacco plantation. And at the time, the Manhattan Project institutes and hospitals and research centers were salivating, waiting for a very aggressive cancer, the most aggressive cancer anybody had ever seen in a human being. And it was found in this woman, Henrietta Lacks. She had a uterine cancer that was extremely malignant. And when they took a biopsy of it, when she showed up at a doctor's office because she was bleeding so much, her cells started to replicate themselves ad infinitum, faster than any other cancer cells from any other patient in that lab or known to science at that time. And these cells were abbreviated with her initials. Her name was Henrietta Lacks. So they always took the first two letters of the first name and the first two letters of the last name. So H-E-L-A, HeLa. And HeLa cells, the Tuskegee Institute figured out how to make hers HeLa cell, that batch that they got from her that was replicating itself, how to really reproduce it. And it became a very desired biotech product. HeLa cells are now in every vaccine. They are in all kinds of different products from the biotech industry. They are a multi-million dollar cash cow, and they all come from this woman. Her cancer cells are in so many different pharmaceutical products, vaccines, all kinds of things that you would never imagine them to be in. And they are what's called a Vero cell line, infinite cell line, because they are like a little carbon copying machine. Whatever they go into, they attach to, and then they churn out more and more and more of it. Tobacco mosaic virus is similar. My belief is that they have now found a match for the HeLa cell in the tobacco mosaic material.
Thank you for that input. Now you mentioned the term capitalism several times, biocapitalism, and among other terms. Now, I've been seeing some documentaries and programs recently suggesting America seems to be going towards a socialist nature. And do you suspect all these? You're using the word capitalism when you describe it, but if the control system that wants to poison us with these things would prefer a socialist system to control humanity, getting all the data and everything in a cloud or a blockchain from us and whatnot, um, then they would eventually, you'd probably be using, if they were to succeed, hopefully they don't, you would actually be using the term biosocialism instead of biocapitalism. Do you get what I'm trying to say here?
I do, but to clarify, there's going to be a division of people. There's going to be the underlings and the overlords, and then there's going to be a group of what could be underlings that will be made into oppressors and enforcers. So biocapitalism only has to do with financial products that are reserved for the overlords to play with and gain wealth from. So the socialist part of this is going to be forced on us so that we're all standardized and equalized, but that our lives, in doing so, our lives, we become traumatized. We undergo loss in this equalization process, right? So that's the socialism. But the capitalism has to do with taking us and doing what they did with mortgages and loans in the housing boom. They made financial products out of loans and mortgages. They separated the two identifying properties of a parcel. One was the parcel number, which referred to the location and the parcel itself, and the other was the loan number that referred to the financial arrangement made around the purchase of that purchase and sale. And these financial products that they created out of loans were traded and maximized for profit. And that's what they will be doing with us. They will be separating our digital identity from our warm body. And based on our paths in this socialization process, they will attach um, our path and journey to hedge funds and investors. You could call them hidden investors who are watching your progress and your failure and betting on one or the other in a given time frame. That's the capitalism. This is called biocapitalism. Human beings are now the commodities that will be sought after. They need to renew the game. They've used it up in houses, stocks, that kind of thing. Now they're going to invest in humans. So that is what biocapitalism is.
Okay, and here comes the one of the things I really enjoyed talking about on this show, capitalism versus socialism in relation to the present day and what could be in store in the future. I guess it would be appropriate to talk about this in this interview as well. Uh, I have said many times on this show, and I kind of stand by this. Maybe it's a personal quote of mine someday people recognize. The only reason capitalism works better than socialism on planet Earth is because we live on a planet where money exists. If there was no money and there was no control system trying to suppress technology that could provide for everybody at no cost, like Nikola Tesla, wink, wink, then we could easily live in a socialist environment where where money doesn't exist, and there's no need to go to war over who's got the better financial status and business and whatnot, and everybody's happy because it's all provided for through the technology that is not suppressed anymore by the oil tycoons and Wall Street goons and the rest of it. There's that classic scene that I finally have seen. I think several actors have shown this scene in several different movies and sources where Nikola Tesla is trying to show his technology to someone, J.P. Morgan or some other tycoon with a cigar in his mouth and his feet up on his table, saying, "Sorry, Tesla, your little box that provides energy to everybody on a city block. There's no profit in that. I am not interested." Well, that attitude may actually change if we're lucky. It seems like the ultimate wishful thinking, but Donald Trump's uncle was one of the people that took Nikola Tesla's technology when Tesla passed away. And you can't help but wonder, maybe Donald Trump's ultimate way of getting the tide turned in his favor in this whole joke of an election debacle would be to maybe either right before or right after Biden gets into the presidency, Trump releases all of the Tesla technology to everybody and says the world can change if you use this. Now that I've shown this to you, maybe you'll be more willing to kick Demented Joe out of the office and allow me to come in for a second term because I'm willing to show this to the world, and maybe even that alien technology that Israeli guy mentioned Donald Trump knows about but was told not to disclose because humans aren't ready for it. That was in an Israeli newspaper. I'm not. That's on record. So this maybe it seems like wishful thinking, but if this plays out, this will totally change your research, my research as well for sure. The way I handle the show, what information I feel is paramount to get out to people. Do you by any chance see this kind of a world coming? The kind that I've talked about.
That you just
That technologies,
described with Tesla
yeah, that Donald,
technology?
yeah, providing for everybody, no money, no need for capitalism, because socialism actually works in an environment like that.
You know, I don't know. I can't tell the future, but I know that the impact investors want to equalize everybody, but not in a good way. It really means loss, no private ownership of anything. You won't even own your clothes. You'll just use clothes, rent clothes. I mean, that's really the definition of a prison, where you wear a uniform that isn't yours. You eat food that is given to you. This universal income that they're thinking of giving us is, maybe some people think that that's a great thing. Well, then we don't need to work. But what they really want you to do, Andrew, is they want you to stay in your little cubicle and live a virtual life on your devices, where you will see yourself as an adventurer interfacing with other adventurers and having adventures. And you will not live a real life. You will never go anywhere. You will never do anything except in 2 dimensions, 2D. Your 3D life will be basically a box that you sit in. But the real aim of keeping you in that box is human energy harvesting, which nobody is talking about yet. Human energy harvesting is attaching you to wearable batteries through piezo nano wires. This uses that concept of piezoelectricity again, and capturing all of the very subtle rhythms of your body, the breathing, the movement of your body, eyelids blinking, your chest heaving up and down, the arterial pulses, the heartbeat. Um, those very, subtle movements of the body can be converted into millivolts. And that's the piezoelectric equation, that frequencies turn into voltage, and voltage turns into frequencies. So they will harvest all of that, and then you will dump your millivolts or volts that you've created during the day from sitting around doing nothing, living a virtual life. Maybe you get to ride a little stationary bike or something to burn some calories and feel invigorated. But that wearable battery will then be its voltage collection, the aggregation of whatever you produced during the day will be put into something larger, and you and I and everybody else will fuel the blockchain. We will provide the energy for Bitcoin to be mined and all the data to be um, put on the blockchain and maintained on the blockchain. So that's it. That's what I think.
Okay, you're entitled to your opinion. You're entitled to your predictions of how things may go down. I mean, the idea that we need to have our privacy, and then if I've heard some people assert that on a planet where everybody was living in harmony, there would be no privacy because everybody is living in harmony and there's no feeling of shame or guilt, so you don't have to keep anything private. I don't really look at it that way myself. I prefer to think of privacy as an authority issue, whereby no free entity has any authority over another free entity. If you're not under binding contract, then nobody has authority over you. So the idea that someone has authority to force you to give up your privacy is non-existent authority. Therefore, you, as a sovereign being, have the right to refuse that. Problem is, though, if we, what I guess I'm trying to lean to here is if we expect to one day become a civilization where we can live in harmony and we can find a way to abolish money and use technology to provide for everybody, and also encourage people not to become couch potatoes and just sit on their fat asses thinking that everything's provided for them. That's another important thing that needs to be pointed out. Give the human race a kick in the pants there. If you want to get there, you gotta be willing to work for it. And if we want to do that, then it would actually certainly be in the best interest of humanity to sacrifice privacy to make sure we can get there. Do we need to sacrifice privacy to get there? I think that's, for lack of a better question, is a question I can pose to you now. To get to that paradise world, no money, everybody's provided through technology, and also everybody's not a couch potato and is willing to give their 2 cents in. Do we need privacy to get there?
Well, I would bring up the term to indignify people. And that's what this COVID thing is partly about, submitting us to indignities. The TSA searches were part of that too. So they don't want us to have our dignity. They want to take it away. And privacy and dignity are related. So to take away our privacy also means to take away our dignity. And I don't think everybody wants to see things about you that they don't normally see in the civilization we live in now. So I will just say that what they have in mind for us, Andrew, is different from what we could envision for ourselves. I think we are creatures of intention and creation, and we need to be sharp enough to see the patterns and the possibilities that they're trying to map out for us. If we can't see those things, that's why I'm giving this interview. If we can't see those things, then we're going to be like the Comanche and the Apache and the Iroquois and all the Indians that got pushed onto reservations and their food source completely eviscerated, which was the buffalo on the Great Plains. And there was nothing left for them to do. Nothing. Nothing. And that's how it's going to be for us if we cannot fathom, meaning we cannot try at starting right now to wrap our heads around what some of these possibilities are. What is biocapitalism? Do you want hedge funds tied to your behavior and your prognosis when your life has been wrecked. That's what the shutdown is about. The shutdown is about starting with a swath of people in the middle class, small business owners, and the people who work for them, putting them out of jobs, offering them these stimulus checks, and trying to see how wrecked they can become. And then there will be all kinds of offerings made to them, tied to apps on their phone, which prompt them to make sustainable choices and decisions, and small rewards dribbling in your Bitcoin account for the right choices you make. But they want transparency. They want behavioral transparency, which right there has to do with privacy. A lifting of privacy so that they can put you into the human capital market all the more easily. So that's what the discussion around privacy needs to take into account, that it is really all tied to the human capital market.
Okay, if that's how you look at it, then you're entitled to your opinion again. Now, I'd like to turn back the clock a couple times, first in the near past and then in the more distant past. Now, this whole idea that this shutdown was enacted by the control system of bad guys on Earth as a way of controlling us and all that, well, it was first tried out in March and April around the world for the first time. Um, and there were some sources out there who said that this shutdown of civilization because of the virus is, well, it's not what you'd led to believe it is in more ways than one. And it actually wasn't when it was first done in March and April. It wasn't actually done by the control system. It was done by the rebel alliance, if you will, that's opposing the control system. One video said the criminal bankers who have controlled Earth since at least the time of ancient Sumeria have are being shut down, and there was talk of certain covert operations like being sent to Europe and all to shut down all the child trafficking underground bases and whatnot. And the alliance wanted to do that during a time where there wasn't a lot of human activity going on for people to know about it. So in reality, that's the real reason we had a shutdown back in March, and it may happen again a few times in such a nature if the alliance seizes opportunities to do mass arrests of the bad guys. I'm sure a lot of people hearing me say this and say, dude, you're wishful thinking again. Well, the very idea that civilization would need to be shut down because of a virus that just produces a rather unpleasant case of the flu and then some in regards to the effects. Um, the idea that such a shutdown would have to happen because of that is asinine. So there had to be something else behind that. And could it be that yes, it really was the good guys who instigated the shutdown, so they could take out the as much of the system of domination and control on Earth as they possibly could. Any theories there or
Well,
ideas
I
or?
hadn't heard that, honestly. But again, you may think of me as more skeptical and suspicious than you would like me to be. But I see the first shutdown as being part of the economic reset mechanism. And I do think that the controllers were very much in charge of that and wanted to really give a big, I mean, they have thrown the book at us. This is not boiling the frog slowly. This is the quick immersion now at high temperature. So,
Well, okay,
sorry, I was just moving my headset. I had to
okay.
cough a tiny bit. I don't have any water left, so anyway, but it's all right. So yeah, that's what I think, Andrew. I think that that's, this is part of this great reset that they have planned for us. And the Great Reset is about changing the nature of our economics.
Yeah, well, I can't help but be skeptical of your skepticism because I've heard other sources say that the entities known that could be referred to as overlords controlling the bad guys on Earth, they've actually been completely taken out. So you would expect that if that's the case, then speeding up the process to take out all the underlings I should only be happening at a quicker and rate. Um, and this idea, Great Reset, well, any idea that the Great Reset in could ultimately turn out to be a currency reset, like a return to the gold standard, which Donald Trump has had hinted he wanted to go to if maybe he had an opportunity to run a second term. But any any idea on that one? Returning to maybe a gold standard?
Well, I know that a lot of people would love to see that, but honestly, again, I don't mean to be skeptical and sound terrible, but I don't see that happening. I don't see that we're going there. I see us going into a technocracy that has been very carefully considered and planned for a very long time. Do you know much about technocracy and the technocratic movement that started in the 30s at Columbia University?
Yes, I probably do because I've heard about that idea there, the technocratic thing that started at Columbia, but I don't think I've really had the chance to look into it in enormous detail.
I wrote a newsletter on it, and I learned a lot from doing the research, but one of their chief, writers was this guy called Wilton Ivey, I-V-I-E. And Wilton Ivey's writings are very helpful to read if you want to learn about technocracy. Their techne in Greek means skill. And so technocracy is rule by skill, which translates to rule by science, rule by anything but humans. The goal of technocracy is to save energy. It's all about energy conservation. And we're talking about joules, which is a Joule. It's a term in physics used to measure output or work. And they feel that human beings governing other human beings is a mistake because human beings are too erratic in their decision making. They actually make errors, mistakes, and they're emotional and they're not reliable. So it's better to be ruled by technical, uh, proven technical concepts and methodologies than by humans. And therefore, the technocratic government increasingly relies on science and technology to make determinations for us. And this is why it's moving everything into the sphere of AI, surveillance first, and then governance by analysis of what is surveilled, the data. So data is the commodity of the future, data, not money. But data will eventually be measured, its worth will be measured in terms of money, wealth, right? So the technocrats want us to be as sustainable as possible on this earth. Sustainability translates into energy conservation. And that's where you're getting this confluence of saving nature, being sustainable, all this. It's basically mumbo jumbo. It's words that sound good. Green, go green, be sustainable. It's not about the earth at all. It's not about nature at all. It's about technological governance because only technology will be able to save us because technology has now figured out the right way to do everything. So we are in a technocratic governmental state now going faster and faster into that. So technocracy, technobiology will moderate your health. Vaccines, if you have genetic medicine being introduced into your body, recoding instructions, this is a technological way to govern your health. That's technocracy.
Oh, okay. And like I said, I could see the way humanity, years from now, there's a lot more machines involved, like Star Wars and Jetsons cartoons come to life, and all this green movement stuff, even though it is really all lie, because man-made global warming is a hoax, and the green movement, it's really all about controlling our lives. The name is saving the earth. Well, if we could save the earth without our lives being controlled, then all this green movement stuff, well, maybe if it was out there and then you got rid of the bad guys controlling it and put good guys in instead, and at the same time released all the technology that could make coal and oil obsolete, then, well, then it would work out nicely. But the problem is the good guys aren't puppeting the strings of the thing, so
Right.
it's not working out that way. And well, hopefully maybe it will, because I did mention my live sources I've heard say the overlords controlling the system on Earth are gone, so the underlings are scurrying like rats in a basement all the more, and hopefully they'll get taken out all the more if drain the swamp really has meaning.
Again, I
So
don't have a crystal ball. I'm just using the stuff that I have come across. You've come across different information, and I'm glad that you've come across that information. Maybe that will happen. But from my perspective, it doesn't look like anything wonderful is about to visit us. I think we have to use our own creativity. And I'm not even saying in the third dimension. We have to figure out how to step into a higher gear altogether and start operating differently. We cannot be creatures of reaction and response forever. And we've been very patient. We put up with this for a very long time. And now we're kind of in a hole. We need to dig ourselves out. And I don't think it's going to be happening in the third dimension by blood, sweat, and tears. We got to do something very innovative.
exactly, and getting a little spiritual there using the term third dimension, but want to keep this more down to earth. And with that being said, I want to turn back the clock in the more distant past, going back to the 1918 Spanish flu that lasted about 2 years, 2 months, like beginning of April, or was it February of 1918 up until April of 1920, and it came in 4 waves. For those that don't understand, maybe because with your great knowledge of science that you've shown so far in this interview, maybe you would know exactly what is the science between of any given virus that's causing a global pandemic going through waves where all of a sudden we think we're out of it and then something comes up again. And boy, you'd hate to think that this means that this virus is going to last till the middle of 2022, but could it, for the same reason the alleged Spanish flu lasted that long and in that many waves? How does that work?
Well, I will say this, that I read a book maybe a year and a half ago called The Invisible Rainbow by Arthur Furstenberg, who was going to become a doctor. He went to medical school at UC Irvine, and then I think he had a root canal that caused him a huge setback and made him very chemically and electrically sensitive. So he has the website cellulartaskforce.org, and he wrote a book which is brilliantly written. It really is. It's a phenomenal, phenomenal book called The Invisible Rainbow. And in this book, he theorized, and I believe he's right, that the Spanish flu was not caused by any virus whatsoever. It was caused by electromagnetism, all of which had to do with radar installations being going in during World War I. So this was borne out through World War II as well. We started to have a communications explosion on this earth with radio technology, radio waves, and radar. And military use of communication technology was paramount in the wars. So World War I and World War II saw these installations going in where you had these antennae that were broadcasting far and wide. I mean, signals could be heard on other continents. And strangely, I'm not looking at my newsletter, I'm talking from memory now. Strangely, the Spanish flu did not strike those people that you would think would be vulnerable, like small children with undeveloped immune systems and the elderly. The Spanish flu took out people in midlife. It took out able-bodied military personnel. And therefore, Furstenberg is very convinced that it was electromagnetically caused. Flu in general is not born by any organism that gets in your body. I believe that flu is a systemic breakdown, and we get flus in the fall and winter, typically, because of the loss of sunlight. It's colder. Our bodies have to burn more energy to stay warm. It's dark. We're not making vitamin D easily, which is extremely important in our biology, our metabolism. We're not getting as much light. I mentioned the piezoelectric effect. There's something called the photoelectric effect. And the effect of light generating and kicking off, I'm talking sunlight, all of these different biological exchanges is huge in our health. So winter, fall and winter is a time for us to, we experience setback and we have to hunker down and we have to weather through hard times. And typically, people didn't have a lot of food in the winter. They didn't have the panoply of, you know, fruits and veggies and all the good stuff that they got in the summer. They had to eat root vegetables. They had to kind of just make do. And that's what happens in our body. Our body goes, my, I have to do some repairs here. You have some weak um, tissue layers in your lungs. You've got to redo your esophageal lining. You've got to rebuild your mucosal passages. Because remember, when we breathe all those tissues in our mucous membranes, in our throat, in our mouth, in our uh, lungs. They're the first receivers of whatever it is we're breathing in. And there are certain kinds of opportunism when sunlight wanes. Sunlight is a natural disinfectant, so spores and molds are in greater abundance when it's cold and damp outside. So we have to do more engineering and rebuilding, and we go through these cycles where our body says, all right, hack, spit, cough, spew all this stuff out. I'm building new tissues. And if you really study the nature of um, efflux from your body when you have the flu or a bad cold, all those different colors of stuff that you're getting rid of, coughing and blowing out, that has to do, the colors reflect different types of cells, different layers of cells, actually. So you're rebuilding everything. And this is why flu is typically, it goes around. It's not contagious. It just happens to a lot of people at the same time for the same reason. Their bodies are undergoing some reconstruction. So the Spanish flu is different. It wasn't a seasonal flu in that way. So flu is just a systemic thing. You can get a flu. I mean, they'll tell you flu-like symptoms. They throw that word around. The drug industry says flu-like symptoms. Every time you turn around, something could generate flu-like symptoms. Because flu is a very generic condition that has to do with an internal inflammatory process going on.
Now, it's interesting you mentioned the thing about Spanish flu possibly being caused by the technology. That ties into something that I was hearing a lot of, I believe, in the first part of this virus thing in March and April, when some people were saying that the virus seems to have some connection to 5G technology and different schools of thought on this. Perhaps there is no virus, it's just 5G technology hitting certain groups of people, or perhaps if you believe there is a virus, perhaps the virus was created in a way to react to 5G communication. And one person, it was in April or May or something like that, showed a map of the world over the case of who's got the virus, and the country at that time that seemed to have the least amount of virus cases was India, which has, despite having the second biggest population in the world, has like less 5G technology than anywhere. So, this thing about 5G and the virus having some connection, whatever it may be, anything to say about that?
Sure, I mean, that's entirely possible. Remember, anything that afflicts people can be blamed on a virus. It's very convenient, right? So, as John Rappaport has reported, there are different things that developed in different parts of the world, all of which were attributed to coronavirus. Yet, they could be coming from different causes. But coronavirus is the operating fiend on the planet right now. So, I mean, I read about a guy who was hit while he was crossing the road, and his death went down in the hospital as COVID. Okay. So that's the fiend. Hospitals are being urged to record intakes as COVID intakes and deaths as COVID related deaths. So it's very possible that the incidence of 5G was experimentally tried here and there, and it affected people badly and caused them to die. So how do we know? I mean, you really only know, Andrew, what you see with your own eyes, right?
Well, yeah, but of course, with visible light being such a small band in the spectrum, that's a huge mistake. And to only worry about that which you can see or hear or just five senses. There's a lot more beyond five sense reality, but we're not really going to get too spiritual. This is more of a down to earth interview. Although, ironically, I'd like to, even though you said you don't want to talk about it too much, it seems like a lot of things people are going to know you by simply because of the About the Sky website. Just quickly, can you maybe just very briefly give a rundown of what in chemtrails is harmful and what they can do to you? Just a quick, brief rundown of the stuff, just so people have something to look back on if they ever want to research this matter themselves. You give them a nice little thing right here if it's not too much trouble.
Oh, well, the chemtrails are what's called stratospheric aerosol geoengineering. It is the laying down of particulates in the lower atmosphere such that they draw moisture to them and form artificial clouds. And there are other materials that evidently have intruded into our lower atmosphere and fallen into onto the surface of the earth and into our bodies and gardens and everywhere that are synthetic. There are biological materials as well. There are synthetic fibers. There's a metallic content, metal oxides in this chemtrail residue. So they all have different functions. They're different features of the mix, you could say, that's being laid out. And they've been doing chemtrails for a long time now, a very long time, consistently since, about 2000 or so. They've been doing them. Late 90s, I think people were starting to really get into the research. Clifford Carnicom noticed them in 98 or so. And they're normalizing them. I mean, I saw a movie, it was some Hollywood movie of biblical times and Jesus, and they had actually painted chemtrails into the sky, into the biblical days sky. I was laughing. I actually was laughing. I thought, wow, that's pretty crafty of them. But yeah, you'll notice if you watch Sound of Music, which was shot in the 60s in Austria, the puffy blue clouds in the sky, sometimes you'll see that very same scene will not have the puffy blue clouds. It will have like a chemtrail haze. But part of it is to block the sun. I did an interview with Mike Williams called The Sepsis, Biological Darkness and the Sepsis Agenda. Because when you filter sunlight, you give a leg up, boost to the decomposing materials in our environment to get to work. So we have the producers of the trophic chain, the food chain, and the decomposers, bacteria, fungi, little boring insects, cold and damp, they all act on decomposition. So when you put artificial cloud layer into the sky and you filter the sun, which is a natural life-giving component of our Earth, you end up hastening decomposition, death, right? So when we have decomposition going on during the day, because the sun isn't strong enough to kill molds and keep them in check, sunlight is a natural disinfectant. In fact, when glass windows went into houses, we noticed a steep diminution of respiratory disease, and hygiene got a lot better because spores and molds didn't have the chance to flourish in the damp. So the chemtrail agenda has been around for a long time, and I would say it's multifaceted, and they have really got it wired now. And people are not noticing it. Everybody is, people here bring folding chairs and bottles of champagne to the beach to watch the sunset in a whole chemtrail sky. And they think it's beautiful.
And it's anything but in reality. Thank you for getting into that. We're almost at the end of this interview, but I do have one more thing I want to ask you about, which I noticed glossing over your articles, and I saw something about canola there, although you weren't talking about the oil. I think you were talking about the plant. But hey, with your scientific knowledge, maybe you could enlighten me on this. I've heard from food sources that one of the worst things you can put in your body is canola oil. Well, good thing I cut back on my mayonnaise that I'm putting on my sandwiches because it's mayo with canola oil. And so, if you know anything about that, what is so bad about canola oil?
Well, the canola plant is hugely GMO'd now, and most of the canola grown in this world is a GMO variety. So right there, you're getting um, a genetically modified um, organism into your body.
Well, actually, no. In the case of the canola oil I eat, it's from Whole Foods, which is 365 store brand, which is supposed to be 100% GMO food free, free food. So, if that is not, is there any other? If you're eating pure non-GMO canola oil, are there any other issues?
Well, again, all I can say is these Trader Joe's and Whole Foods maintain that their store brands never are GMO'd, but we don't know. And I know that they use glyphosate itself on as a desiccant, a drying agent on all of these grains and these core crops, canola being one of them, sugar, everything. So I don't really know. But then again, the creation of oils is not a clean process. I don't know how they extract oil from, I think canola is rapeseed. That's the other name for it. I don't know quite how they extract the oil, but apparently it's not a good idea uh, to avail yourself of vegetable oils any longer. It was very popular at one time, the day of margarine. So I would say eat your mayonnaise in moderation.
Okay, well, oils too, not just canola oil, but olive oil. For every person that says olive oil is good, there's someone who says olive oil is bad. What's the
Well,
truth?
I saw a Mercola article, Dr. Mercola, this is a couple of years ago. Olive oil that comes to the United States is not good olive oil, even if you pay a lot for it and you get it in a fine store. In the importation trade, it is cut with canola oil. So I lived in North Africa at one time, and the olive oil there was unbelievable. I mean, the minute somebody opened a jar or bottle of it, you could smell it. It was incredibly fragrant. If you cooked anything in it, the smell just would go 3 stories high. I have never found olive oil like that in America, not no matter how expensive it is or how green it is in the bottle. The olive oil here is like yellow, light yellow. And I learned from this Mercola article that it's just diluted with canola.
How about
Isn't that
that?
interesting?
Okay. Yes, yes.
So you can't get away
That
from
is interesting.
canola
Yeah.
oil.
Wow. Interesting. Well, thanks. Looks makes me look at food differently. So, that being said, Sophia, we've almost reached the 2 hour mark, and people have lousy attention spans, which has unfortunately cost me the chance at a potentially big audience for this show. And anybody else who does 2 hour programs knows the same. So I always make a big stink about that at the beginning or the end of my
No,
interviews to
no,
give
Andrew,
people a kick in the pants and hope
let's
that
let's say to ourselves that people will hang with this interview because I said so many weird things that they maybe didn't hear before. Why should they turn it off? Maybe they'll come back to it. Maybe they'll listen to it again, right?
I do hope that is the case. So I hope your unique style will prove to be an exception to the lousy attention span issue. So or factor or whatever. So thank you. This was a very, very enlightening, very enjoyable, very unique kind of interview that I had in a while. Loved it very much. And a lot of things you did in the past are different than the things you do now. But hey, times are going to change. Things are going to change, and I'm glad that you're feel that you're on the right path. And best of luck to you. So getting kind of late in my part of the world here in the Philadelphia suburbs. Got to be going to bed early because got to get up early for work tomorrow to catch up on a few things that I got to use my vacation hours on. But that's the problem with taking vacations. You get a lot of work on your desk when you get back. So I will be facing that. So I'll be going to bed now. Fascinating interview though. And again, this is probably going to be the first one people have to pay for to see right after it's done. It'll be on YouTube in a couple weeks, a few weeks at the most, and cost.tv as well. So take care, Sophia. Pleasure having you on.
Thank you, Andrew. Very nice of you to invite me. A pleasure to meet you, and I hope that I delivered for everybody, including you. So thank you.
You're very
All
welcome.
right.
Take care now.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.